Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Personal and Organizational Wildfire Preparedness and Prevention. My name is Melissa Keene, and I'm a Senior Program Manager with the Institute for Local Government, and I will be your host and moderator this morning. So a quick overview of today's agenda. We're just going to do some welcome and logistics and introductions of our speakers, and then we'll jump into our content and hear presentations around information on wildfire mitigation, wildfire preparedness, wildfire response, and wildfire recovery. And then we have some time held for Q&A. We'll share some resources with you all to learn more that our speakers will share with you today, and then we will wrap up by noon. So you've probably noticed that your line has been muted, and you will be muted for the duration of today's webinar, but that doesn't mean you can't ask us questions. So you should see a questions box on your control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and you can type a question into that box at any point in time during the webinar, and we will respond if we can, or we will hold that question to the Q&A with the speakers at the end of today's call. Another note on this front is that we are also recording today's webinar, and we will be sharing that with all of you and anybody who registered in the next few days, along with the slide deck and the resources that we mentioned and the resources that you see in your handout section of your control panel as well. So just a little bit of information about ILG before we get started this morning, in case you're not familiar with us. We are a nonprofit and nonpartisan affiliate of the League of California Cities, the California State Association of Counties, and the California Special Districts Association. So we provide practical and easy-to-use resources so that local agencies can effectively implement policies on the ground. We do this in a number of program areas. We have a program focused on what we call leadership and governance, which includes the legally mandated trainings that you will have to take around ethics and harassment prevention. We do a lot of work around effective councils and boards and commissions, and have a suite of resources for folks who are new to public service. We also have a program focused on civics education and workforce, which is dedicated to helping create that pipeline to public service, get young folks interested in local government as a career path, and thinking about things like retention and recruitment of staff and some of the other challenges that our local government partners are facing right now. We also have a program dedicated to public engagement, which kind of runs the gamut of all of the things that you might need to do in the engagement space, from getting started to increasing civility in public meetings, dealing with difficult meeting participants. And really part of our focus there is to embed public engagement into local government operations and help you do that in a more strategic and thoughtful and equitable way. And then lastly, we have a program focused on sustainable and resilient communities. So right now in that space, we're doing a lot around land use and housing, but we also are working in a lot of programs around climate resilience, greenhouse gas emission reductions, energy efficiency, and really want to help recognize local governments that are taking steps in that space and provide resources and training and peer learning opportunities for folks who are looking to do more there. So that's ILG in a nutshell. If you're not familiar with us, definitely check out our website. We have a lot of free resources, upcoming trainings, and additional webinars that you might find helpful. So with that, I want to introduce our presenters this morning, and I'm just going to do some very short introductions and let them talk a little bit more about their backgrounds before we jump into today's content. So today we have with us Rahim Nathu, who is with Southern California Edison, Nora O'Brien with Connect Consulting Services, and Jorge Rodriguez with Sonoma County. So Rahim, do you want to do a quick introduction of yourself before we jump into today's presentation?
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. Good morning and happy Thursday. I'm coming to you live this morning from Southern California Edison's Emergency Operations Center. Currently, I'm an emergency response manager at Southern California Edison, part of our business resiliency organization. I'm responsible for situational awareness tools such as SCE's weather stations, Alert Wildfire HD cameras, and SCE's public safety partner portal, amongst many other items. I got nearly 10 years in transmission and distribution experience in a variety of roles, as well as 3 years in the consulting industry and 3 years in the aerospace and defense industry. I'll turn it over to Nora.
Hi, I'm Nora O'Brien, the CEO of Connect Consulting Services. We've been in business for 13 years. I've been in emergency management for 20 years. I'm a certified emergency manager, certified with the International Association of Emergency Managers. Also have a master's degree in disaster and emergency management concentration. Have done activations on many wildfires and flood events and H1N1 and COVID-19. I lead an amazing team of planners, trainers, drill folks, exercisers, and compliance folks. Work with our clients across the country, work with county, state, local, special districts all over the country, and also healthcare organizations and community-based organizations. Happy to share wildfire preparedness. It's something that we have a lot of concern about in terms of, we know what's going to happen. So hopefully we can give you some tips and tools today to support your process. Give it over to Jorge.
Great, thank you, Nora, and good morning, everyone. And thanks to Institute of Local Government for having me on. I am Jorge Rodriguez. I'm a certified emergency manager, just like Nora, with IAEM, with additional certifications in public information as well as continuity of operations. I've been in emergency management about 7 years with overall public safety service of 13. Currently the Community Alert and Warning Coordinator for Sonoma County, but I do have the responsibilities on some day-to-day projects that include planning as well as response operations. Again, I'm happy to be here, and Melissa, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. Looking forward to your presentations this morning. We've got 2 quick poll questions that we'd love for you to respond to before we jump in today, just to get a better sense of what your agencies are facing and where your priorities sit as it relates to some of the content we'll cover today. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this first poll. Hopefully you'll see that pop up on your screen. But we're really looking to see how high of a priority wildfire response and preparedness is for your agency. Is this something that you all are very concerned about, something that you're looking to maybe do more on? So we'll give this just a few seconds for you to respond to. About 75% of you responding, so I'll give you just a couple more seconds. Okay, go ahead and close this, and then I will share. So not surprisingly, since you're on this morning's webinar, the vast majority of you are saying that wildfire preparedness response mitigation is a high priority for your agency. And then one more. Go ahead and launch this. So as we're digging into today's content, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. So of those options, which is the highest priority for you all, or are they all kind of equally important as you're looking to plan and prepare for emergency events? Again, it's just a couple more seconds. Most of you have voted. I'll share these out as well. So most of you all are thinking all of these as high priorities, which makes sense. Of the single responses, wildfire preparedness, about 20%, and then wildfire mitigation. So that's where we will be starting this morning on the mitigation front. So I'm going to go ahead and change the slide here and turn it over to Nora to start talking about some mitigation efforts.
Okay. The important thing to know about mitigation is the whole point of you can't mitigate everything. We know that. You can't reduce or eliminate the risk completely, but when you have identified what mitigation situations you need to be in, it's an opportunity for your organization to really know what to plan for. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about a grid that we use oftentimes when we do risk analysis. It's called the hazard vulnerability analysis process. This particular grid was actually created by Kaiser Permanente, and you're like, I'm not a healthcare organization. How does that apply to me? What I like about this particular tool, and for those of you, I saw many of you that are cities and counties that are on the call, so maybe you're not using a hazard vulnerability analysis, can't try to say that 4 times, not very effectively, to do an HVA process. The value is you get to see what your highest risks are. So, and I know it's small numbers here, but essentially the intent is with an HVA process. And for some reason, the hot link to this particular grid, which is it's open source, I'll make sure I put it in the chat so you guys can have access to it. What I like about it, it's very simple, and because I am not, so many of you are probably already the, the Excel queens and kings. I am I'm the lower end of that, princess maybe, but I'm not a fan uh, of Excel itself per se. But what I like about this, the formulas are already included. So by going through this process, and I highly recommend this, to do this process at least once a year, because things change. Think about where you were, for example, with COVID 2.5 years ago. It seems like 2.5 centuries ago, but it was only 2.5 years ago when COVID started, and kind of where you are today. Things change, your process change, opportunity for you to revise things. When you do the hazard vulnerability analysis, what you're saying is, what are the things that I, as an organization, as a community, what I need to prepare for, and what do I have down cold, and I do this all the time, and we have great systems and process, and what are things that I need to pay attention to. So what this process for hazard vulnerability analysis is, you have the essentially the scoring of whatever type of event it may be. The good thing too about this particular tool, that is again open source by Kaiser Permanente, is that you can change all the things that are more applicable to you. So for the most part, you probably aren't going to have medical gases that are going to impact you, but you just delete that and put something that, or delete it completely, or don't score it. But so you have whatever the process is, and then you say, what is the likelihood that that's going to happen? And we'll get to in a minute to get the idea of how you can get to find out what your hazard risk specific to wildfire is. But what's the probability? Has that happened before? Is it a high probability? So is it a 3? So it's likely going to happen. It happened last year, or it happened 2 years ago, so it's most likely to happen, or it's not. It doesn't apply to us, and not every type of event is going to apply to this process. But do you have alerts? Are you getting regular alerts about this all the time, or maybe not? Have you had activations of, have you been evacuated due to a wildfire? Have you been evacuated due to a water shortage or drought, or what are those things are? So that kind of thing. So that lets to say, what's the probability it's likely to have happen? Then you go into what's the kind of like human impact of a specific event. Obviously, wildfire, human impact is huge. So that's going to be a very high probability of something that happens if there's going to be a wildfire. Good example, like in Sonoma County, a friend of mine and many others in the Coffee Park neighborhood lost their home. Obviously, we don't want to see that happen again, but it might likely happen again, and unless you do that mitigation piece. And then you look at property impact. So what's the human impact, the property impact, and then you look at the business impact. And that business impact could be that you can't get into the building in order to run your operations. You can't get into your work location. What we've seen during COVID is that so many more people are working remotely than they ever did before, because they were forced to, in order to mitigate the spread of COVID. But so like you kind of come up with this number and looking at that severity and the magnitude. And then, so this is kind of like what that number is. And then, so you're scoring this at, high, low, medium, etc. And then through this process for hazard vulnerability analysis is that you will also say, what is my preparedness level for my organization? Like, we have this down pat, we have our go kits, our staff are trained on evacuation, we are trained on incident command, or whatever those things are, but our preparedness is solid, or we could do better, so those kinds of things. So it allows you to rank your system. And what's your internal response? Again, if you've done this before, you have some past performance, you have some past experience, your staff kind of know what to do, you have some muscle memory about what to do. So how do you think that that's going to work? And then external. So like you might have for your city, for your special district, for your organization, might have a great internal response and you have got it together, but your organization, your community, your city, your county, whatever your jurisdiction is, their systems are lacking, their communications lacking, whatever those things are. Sorry to you, Jorge, in Sonoma County, not throwing you under the bus per se, and it's an opportunity. And then what it does is actually gives you a number based on your rankings, right? And so what I think the value of this process for an HVA, and if you've already do this, I'd love to hear from you guys if you have done an HVA in the past or you do this on a regular basis, is actually going to come with a risk rating. And when you're done with this process, and you can do it on, we highly recommend it on an annual basis. Maybe you do it every 2 years. It depends for your, for your agency or organization, how you want to do this. But the advantages for this risk is you get to see what are the things I need to pay attention to. And those things I need to pay attention to, I need to have, for example, an annex specific to wildfire or active shooter or flood or whatever those highest risks are. You don't necessarily need, or chemical release or whatever those things are. So what we recommend is for your emergency operations plan that you have at least 6 to 8 of your highest risks that when you've done this HVA process, hazard vulnerability analysis process. So then you're like, okay, these are the things that are most likely based on this risk rating. So I really like this process because it's really straightforward. It's easy. It's open source. It's just an Excel table, but it's an opportunity for your organization to come together. The other thing that's valuable about this, as it's specific to mitigation, is one of our clients went through this hazard vulnerability analysis process, and one of the questions is specific to sewer. Now, you wouldn't think that sewer necessarily is an issue in wildfire, or sewer could be a problem around business continuity. But what they had done was, because we asked the questions and sat down and had this conversation and walked through the steps of doing this process, what we had found is they realized that they had lost over 6 days because they had a sewer problem. There was a sewer problem, and they fixed the sewer, and it meant that the staff could not get into the building. They happened to be an organization. They're a humanitarian organization, and they actually needed to be in their physical warehouse in order to do their jobs. They couldn't do that remotely, and it really impacted their staff to get to work and stay at work. So it became a business continuity issue. So we think that there's value in this process to do this hazard vulnerability analysis. And we're going to go to the next slide, talk a little bit about hazard mitigation planning itself. So hazard mitigation planning, really what it does is, so once you've identified what those risks are, you want to identify those things that you can do. So does it mean you can afford, we're going to get to some strategies in a minute. Does it mean that you necessarily can avoid wildfire? No. But if you can identify and write down all the things the steps that you're taking to address the risks, your organization is going to be more disaster resilient, because you've done that, what we call blue skies, and when it's, when the sun's shining, thinking about and having those internal conversations about what can you do to mitigate and eliminate that threat as best you can. So hazard mitigation planning reduces the loss of life and property by minimizing the impact of disasters as best you can. It begins, state and tribal and local governments identifying those risks and the vulnerabilities that are common in your area. And I'm sorry to say, in California, and unfortunately many other places due to climate change around what those wildfire risks are, sorry to say it, we're going to continue to see more severe weather. We're going to continue to see more severe weather that's going to impact us on wildfires. So after you identify those risks, they develop a long-term strategies to protect your people and your process, people and your property, and they're key to breaking the cycle of disaster damage and reconstruction. So you don't want to be in a situation where you're rebuilding every year because you've had that same disaster. So are there things that you can do? We'll talk about that in a bit. So it supports the National Flood Insurance Program, hazard mitigation assistance, FEMA building code strategy, and there is a brand new local mitigation planning policy guide we want to make sure you're aware of, and that you can download it right from that hot link. I'm going to the next slide. I'm going to talk specific to wildfire threat. So there's things that are really simple that for your organization and for at your home as well, regularly cleaning roofs and gutters to clear of leaves and debris, because that is essentially, that's fuel for the fire, I'm sorry to say. It's also recommended you create a defensible space around your home, around your building as well, at least 50 to 100-foot safety zone. Because what that means is, let's say, you know, your tree is right up against your house, it's easily going to transfer to your home or to your building, to your office building. So creating that defensible space around. Keep your lawn hydrated and maintained. I know it's tough. We're in a drought. That's a tough thing. You want to keep it, you know, short if we're, or go to drought resistant plants towards your building and also for, you know, for your home. Stack firewood at least 100 feet away. You don't want to do it right next to your building, because again, that's more fire threat. And if you're warned of red flag warnings or extreme fire danger or a potential public safety power shutoff event, you want to fill your car with gas ahead of time. I know it's tough when it's $6 a gallon. It's definitely a tough situation. But if you have to evacuate quickly, you certainly can do that. And then on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about some more strategies, because we're giving you some ideas and resources here. We'd also like to hear from you about, you know, things that you've done that we didn't share, because we're all about learning here. We want to learn from you. We want to learn from each other. And unfortunately, you might have learned from past experience because you've been impacted by a wildfire. A couple of other things: design the landscape of your home with fire safety in mind. Select materials and plants that can help contain the fire rather than fuel it. For example, ice plants. They're not beautiful, but that means that they're, again, not going to add fuel to the fire. Hardening your structures. Use fire retardant non-combustible materials with chemical fire retardants on the roof and exteriors of your buildings. So whether it's your home or whether it's your office building. Set aside household tools that being used as fire tools, rakes, axes, hand tools, hand chainsaws, buckets, all those kinds of things. You know, you might have to, you know, also your hose. You never quite know if you'll be needing that. Clearing mark your driveway entrances and display your address so it can be seen from the road. Remove dry vegetation around from propane tanks, and know how to shut off your gas and your power and your water to your home and to your building ahead of time. Okay, more on the prepare. Okay, now we're giving over to Raheem and talking about vegetation management.
All right, good morning. Thank you for that, Nora. Now that you've heard about mitigation and preparing ahead for wildfires, I'd like to brief you on some of the measures Southern California Edison is taking around veg management and grid hardening. The safety of our customers, communities, and employees is our #1 priority at Southern California Edison. State regulations require utilities to trim or remove trees and vegetation so that they don't grow into high voltage power lines, which could not only cause a power outage, but also spark a fire or be a danger to the public. Trained SCE personnel inspect trees throughout SCE's service area and identify site and/or tree conditions that pose hazards. These trees that pose hazards must be mitigated, which can mean up to complete removal. We typically inspect about 1.5 million trees a year and prune nearly 900,000 of these trees. We're continuing our efforts to inspect, trim, and remove trees to prevent vegetation from coming into contact with electrical equipment and potentially sparking a fire. SCE understands that removing trees can be disruptive to the community, but the work is necessary in high fire risk areas for public safety. This is just one of the many mitigation efforts SCE has taken to prevent wildfires. Next slide, please. Beyond veg management, SCE is also taking a number of measures to harden the grid. There's a wonderful one-pager graphic that'll be shared at the end of the presentation for ease of reference. It provides a high-level overview of how SCE is working to reduce wildfire risk in our communities. I'll also post the link in the chat towards the tail end of the presentation. A few of the grid hardening measures I'd like to highlight include insulated wire, more commonly known as covered conductor, I want to get into some specifics on why covered conductor is good for our communities and what benefits it provides. I'll also talk about fast-acting fuses, and last but not least, I'll talk about fire-resistant poles. So jumping into covered conductor. So replacing bare wire with insulated wire, more commonly known as covered conductor, significantly reduces the possibility of power lines arcing or sparking if contact occurs with an object like a tree branch or a metallic balloon. We plan to install an additional 1,100 miles of covered conductor throughout this year, adding to our existing approximately 3,260 miles that are already covered. SCE expects to have replaced more than 4,200 miles of circuit miles of covered conductor, or approximately 40% of our overhead distribution lines in high fire risk areas by the end of the year. During a recent PSPS event, our crews found pieces of a trampoline, believe it or not, that flew into the lines. And you could imagine the type of hazard that posed to the line. So covered conductor really does its job in helping diminish the possibility of lines arcing or sparking wildfires. I'll move on into fast-acting fuses. So fast-acting fuses interrupt electrical current more quickly and essentially reduce the risk of ignitions when there is what's called an electrical fault, such as when a tree falls on a power line or another object falls into our power lines during high wind conditions. So we plan to install or replace fuses at about 350 locations this year, adding to our existing repository of 13,400 fuses that are already out there. In regards to fire-resistant poles, we're installing a mix of composite poles and wooden poles with fire-resistant wrap, which essentially reduces the risk of damage to poles during an emergency, allowing us to restore power safely and more quickly to our customers. In summary, grid hardening helps reduce the wildfire risk, right? We're doing our part as a utility. I know Nora mentioned a lot of good things to think about on what you can do from your perspective as well too. To end on this, grid hardening actually also resulted in fewer PSPS, the public safety power shutoff events. So last year, we had 9 PSPS events. That was actually down from 13 the year prior, impacting 76% fewer customers. So you can see the real benefits that we achieve as a result of grid hardening. In addition to grid hardening, I want to cover a couple more things real quick. So we also have a partnership with the Orange County Fire Authority, LA County Fire Department, and Ventura County Fire Department, where we have 3 helitankers staged in strategic areas that can be deployed to fight fires across SCE service areas, right? Not just in those 3 counties. In fact, last year was successfully deployed outside of SCE service territory as part of mutual assistance and coordination with state agencies like CAL FIRE. These helitankers can also operate at nighttime, which is a huge bonus. In addition to that, we also have 166 alert wildfire HD cameras, and that number continues to grow as a part of our wildfire mitigation plan, and about 1,500 plus weather stations that give us real-time situational awareness that are used on our overall response and mitigation efforts. That's all I got for now. I'll turn it back over to Melissa.
Great, thank you, Nora and Rahim. Just a quick reminder to the folks on the line to please drop any questions you have into the questions box, and we are monitoring those, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. We are now going to move into preparedness. We're going to go back to Nora to share some tips in this space. Nora, if you're trying to talk, you're muted.
There we go. Sorry about that.
There we go. Perfect.
There we go. Is that better? Okay, I'm back. So as many as, believe it or not, 90% of wildfires are human caused. Unfortunately, sometimes it's things where we actually have arson, which we certainly don't want to see that, but it can be something as dragging a chain, that causes a spark, and there's fuel there, and we're off to the races per se, down power lines, and about 10% were started by lightning. Remember a couple summers ago, we had the fire NATO. That was just so fun. So those are, believe it or not, some of the reasons we have wildfires. And because of, we're going to continue, as I said, because of climate change, we're going to continue to see more wildfires because of drought, long-term drought, but also drought and high winds, and especially in California, we're mostly a desert. We're trying to, put a lot of people in a place that doesn't have a lot of water. So that's a whole nother issue too. Okay, on to the next slide. Let's see. There we go. So let's look at some of the numbers from the 2020 and 2021 wildfire season. So, I mean, it doesn't mean necessarily because we had 9,000 fires in this. These are from CAL FIRE. 9,000 fires, almost 10,000 in 2020, and there's less, 8,300 in 2021. Doesn't mean that they haven't been nearly as destructive. 10,000, so 2020 was a bad year for us. 10,000 buildings destroyed, 33 fatalities, 4 million acres burned. Last year, though, not as, certainly not as bad, but certainly terrible, 3,600 buildings destroyed, and over 3 million acres burned. A good example was the Dixie Fire, which that alone, that particular one, burned the entire Sierra Ridge and was just under 1 million. Just that one fire, just under 1 million acres burned. So sorry to say. And if you can see this trend from the past is that we are going to continue to see larger and larger fires. You don't want to see that. But what that means for you is that if you want to know what your fire hazard severity zone is, so for those folks that are on the line that are already doing mitigation planning in your communities, for your organizations, whether it's your city, your county, your special district, your other folks that we have on the call, if you want to know exactly where your fire hazard zones is, you can go to that hot link at the bottom there under the 2021 billets and tell you exactly. You can put your address in and to know what that fire hazard severity zone looks like, which, it shouldn't be a huge surprise to you. But one thing that I always recommend on the preparedness side is for you to also look at other, your loved ones. So if if your parents live in another part of the state, or your kids are in a different county than, like you're living in the Bay Area and your kids go to school in Alameda County, and you live in, Contra Costa County, and you work in San Francisco County, San Francisco. So those kinds of things happen. So just want to know exactly what those fire zones are. The other thing that's important to know is, once you know that information, you know that risk, is you know what to plan for. So we're based in Sacramento. Connect Consulting Services is based in Sacramento. I was really surprised. We were doing what we call a tabletop exercise, a discussion-based exercise based on wildfire for the Sacramento area. And I was really surprised because, I've been in emergency management for 20 years, and I don't really think as Sacramento being a high fire threat. Certainly we have Placer County to the north, and we have El Dorado County that they've had fires in the past. But I looked specifically to Sacramento County, and I was really surprised. Well, we actually, like Cala Vista County, et cetera, a little bit to our south. But there's actually a really high fire threat. It just means that just because we haven't had a fire doesn't mean that that's not going to happen, because we have all the things that matter. We tend to have high heat, low humidity, wind, and fuel. That equals a wildfire. So it's certainly that case. So just want to make sure that you're aware that if you didn't have that resource, it's from CAL FIRE, or friends at CAL FIRE. It's a great opportunity. So let's talk about the next slide here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the different definitions. And we'll go through these pretty quickly because we want to be able to give you some more strategies as well. So fire weather watch. So the National Weather Service issues a fire weather watch when incoming weather conditions, again, those low humidity, wind, timing, and also quite a lot of fuel. That means that the critical fire weather conditions are possible within the next 12 to 72 hours. And then you have critical fire weather patterns that quickly increase the fire danger and trigger rapid fire spread. The other concern about wildfires is, and that wind is usually a huge concern. When that wind comes, it might be 5 miles away from you, that wind, but the wind comes up and it could be at your back door before you even know it. So a couple more. Go to our next definitions list. Okay, red flag warning. So National Weather Service, and something that I certainly love to recommend, National Weather Service has a great app if you have not downloaded it. And I know I'm going a little bit into Jorge's information, but I highly recommend downloading the National Weather Service map app. It's a great app. And so when they're put out a red flag warning, again, sustained winds more 15 miles per hour or greater, low humidity, temperatures greater than 75, that dry fuel, and then the chance of lightning. We just had lightning in Southern California just yesterday, so sorry to say, but that red flag warning is a real problem, and it's the highest level of alert specific to wildfire. So if you're getting that warning, this is when your preparedness needs to be kicking in on a personal level for you and your family and your loved ones, but also for your office mates as well. Okay, next slide. Okay, so here are some things that you can do to prepare for wildfire. Know your community's evacuation plan. It's important to know. And identify escape routes, because oftentimes what happens is you're used to going down a highway or even a side road that you use on a regular basis. Let's say you live in a more rural area. Oftentimes, because of disaster, you have to remember it's specific to wildfire, because the fire's that way, you can't go that way. So do happen to know what your evacuation plan looks like. Yeah, you should have in your emergency plan for your organization, but also for your home, include how to evacuate people with disabilities or others, access and functional needs, or people that maybe it's seniors, maybe it's kids, maybe you have family members that are ventilator dependent or need a wheelchair. You need to think of additional planning considerations for those individuals. So think about what are you going to do? Do you know where to go if you do have to evacuate? If you have to evacuate by car, keep your car fueled, as I mentioned. Keep an emergency kit. I'm going to give you some resources for that. Create a go bag. Does it mean you need does it mean you necessarily need a bug out bag that the world is ending and you need 72 days of food? No, you need some kind of go bag for each family member. You also want to plan and to communicate, in case you're not together when the authorities issue a fire weather watch or a red flag warning if you have to evacuate. Practice on how you communicate with each other. I'm sure almost my family has a text chain. I'm sure you do as well. Practice that for disaster and for specific to wildfire. Important to have phone numbers written down in your wallet, your purse, not just in your phone, because we know, if you don't have your phone charger, you don't have access to it. I certainly personally love Dropbox or Teams, or there's a whole lot of different, or Google Drive or anything like that you can store vital records. Big fan of that. And then if you have children, give them an emergency communication card. Tell them who you need to reach and and such as how to find law enforcement if you do happen to get separated for whatever reason. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is a big fan. I'm a big fan of Go Kits. Winter cap, maybe not needed today when it's 100 degrees, but certainly you want to throw that in there. A visor, work gloves are great. Survival sleeping bag if you need to. Drinking water, dehydrated food. Big fan of, there's beef jerky or, granola bars or those things out. Clothes in a storage bag. socks and undergarments and shirts and shoes and a binocular or something like that. So those are the things to plan. And you can have this in your car. This is not something that, or you have it ready to go. You're just a grab and go situation. But it's something that if you do have to evacuate, what it looks like, how to grab that, because you never quite know when you'll need these things. So big fan of preparedness kits. Next slide. So other things that we think that's also really important to have, solar hand crank radios and or a flashlight. American Red Cross sells a great one that is pretty easy. I think it's about $40 and you can get them on Amazon. So it's solar or and it's a hand crank. We love that one. A multi-tool, Leatherman or whatever that is. Those are great to have. Parachute cord, you never quite know when you'll need that. A poncho, emergency blanket. We hope that you don't need these things, but again, having these preparedness things, it gives you some peace of mind because the whole point of having a go kit is a grab and go situation. Okay, next slide. So this is what we like to call the dollar store emergency kit. And I'd love to hear from you guys, and maybe you can put in the chat or the questions. Do you have this? Do you have an emergency kit that, that has all these kinds of things, your hand sanitizer and insect repellent and duct tape and all those kinds of things, eyeglass repair kit, markers, all of these things you can get at the dollar store. I don't know if you've ever thought about this. This is something that you've already done. This is already ready to go. But think about this. That will help. That will help your organization, help you. This can, again, can be ready to go in your home. What I know also too that we've done is some of the trainings that we've done personal preparedness trainings for some of our clients like VA Health System in Palo Alto, and provided a personal preparedness kit. This is an opportunity for you at your next in-service or your all-staff meeting. Ask this question: are you guys prepared? Do you have this? We also can provide and put a link in a handout of what this looks like, a checklist of what to include, but just some more resources. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is an opportunity for you. And we won't go over this too long, but this is an opportunity to get free items for your kit, playing cards and coffee, tea, and sugar packets and all those things. Many of us go to hotels and motels and you can get those things, clothing and shoes and hats and those kinds of things. The point is having these things prepared ahead of time, hopefully will give you some peace of mind if you do have to evacuate quickly. Next slide. So the other thing is we talked about an emergency plan, including communications and pre-designated meeting sites and such, emergency kits, emergency food and water. Plan for all members of your immediate family and your pets and your livestock. That's one of our staff has a lot of livestock, so he'll always put livestock when he helps us put together trainings and such. He's like, he has 40 goats. It's not something you can just, take the goats with you in the car kind of thing, and practice. And more information on homes and building, wildfire mitigation preparedness. That's a CAL FIRE link we want to make sure that you have access to, and that also gives you some more resources. Okay, giving it back to Raheem.
All right, great information, Nora. Thank you for that. So I want to take what Nora said and build on it, right? Now that you've heard a variety about preparedness measures related to wildfires, how do you get more information on what's going on out there, or what information is available to help you better prepare? So I'd like to cover SCE's Public Safety Partner Portal. So this tool is meant to be a one-stop shop information destination for public safety partners. It contains key information related to PSPS events, public safety power shutoff events, along with circuitry in high fire risk areas, along with a host of other information. In the future, we are looking to convert this into an all hazards portal, so it goes beyond just PSPS and wildfires. You can get access to this data ahead of events to help you and your organization better prepare and plan for any potential impacts from PSPS events. The data in the portal, it helps you access key information related to your communities ahead of time so that you can use this for advanced planning, right? So looking at the multitude of data that's provided to our public safety partners in the portal, you can use it to make response prioritization decisions, right? For example, do you want to focus your efforts on a circuit that, let's say, is densely populated with residents, or do you want to focus your efforts perhaps to residents that have a high concentration on a circuit that might be deemed as critical infrastructure or medical baseline and or critical care, right? So this is the type of key information that you can use ahead of time outside of PSPS events through the Public Safety Partner Portal to get access and make those key decisions ahead of time. During an event, the portal also contains real-time information that you can access to get real-time updates on what's going on with the current, let's say, PSPS event. We had one last Friday that was isolated up in Inyo County for one particular circuit. So the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, they've identified who can essentially have access to this portal. So on the right side of the screen, you'll see who is deemed as a public safety partner and or a critical infrastructure customer to the Southern California Edison Company. So I think it's key to build on, not only what Nora said in terms of preparedness, but then also accessing this type of information that's made available to our partners to help, better prepare and plan for any PSPS events that might be coming. Next slide, please. All right, I'll turn it over to my colleague.
Thank you very much, Raheem, and thank you very much, Nora, for that preparedness information. And to just reiterate, these are also the tips and tricks that you can share with your residents in your community to help them better prepare as well. So I'm going to ask Melissa to bring up the first poll question there, and please take a moment and be honest as you answer this question. It is going to focus a little bit on the alert and warning piece. So the first poll question, do you currently have a dedicated alert and warning program? And this includes staff as well as a system to use and access to make that notification along with training. So again, be honest, do you have a dedicated alert and warning program? I'll give it a few seconds, and Melissa, if you could let me know when to close or display that, and we can continue on.
Yeah, we've got about half the folks have responded already, so we'll give this another few seconds, and then I will share it out. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this one, and then I will share the results.
Thank you very much. So not surprising, yes, 68% not sure, just a little shy of 20%, and no, 14%. So good numbers overall in terms of how we, California and governments and members have a dedicated alert and warning, and we'll go on and expand a little bit more as we continue on. But when we start to talk about policy, it really starts with you. And alert and warning is an important concept of that because residents are coming to expect real-time information almost as it happens. They want to know that something is going on. So you don't want to know what those expectations are during an emergency. You don't want to find out the hard way of what your community is looking for in terms of information during an incident or during a fire. Sonoma County, of course, unfortunately, had that experience firsthand in 2017, and since then we've had that similar experiences with the information expectation from the public. So you really got to think about how your internal communications are handled, who's handling that information, what methods you are using to alert your residents. So depending on the size of your jurisdiction, you might have staff who you can assign to alert and warning, or you might have staff who are assigned to day-to-day communications who serve as public information officers. But you're also going to ask, if there was a crisis or if there was an incident, would they be doing something else, or would they continue on doing those day-to-day functions? And if so, is that done in writing? Is there a policy that says that the folks assigned to communications will do that during an incident, and what kind of authorities and messages can they go out and say without needing approvals of higher up? So coming into that policy piece. Now, if you don't have folks who are dedicated or assigned to crisis communications or public information, do you have identified staff members who could take on those roles, but also are they trained to do so? Is there a support mechanism that your organization or jurisdiction has for them to get that training during the day-to-day, so that when the time comes and there is an incident, they're able to function and take on that role? Also think about, is your organization investing in alert and warning? 68% in the poll said that you do have a program, which is great. But also consider that it's not just paying an annual fee that we're looking at in terms of funding or the actual dollars, but investing in what's working for your community, how that expectation is going to be managed, what kind of alerts and messagings are you going to be sending out, and what kind of messaging are they expecting? And let's go over to the next slide. We'll look at let's talk about the procedures and those key steps and authorities. So as mentioned before, having the staff dedicated is only a part of it. You're looking at your agency and jurisdiction. You need to have those formal procedures ahead of time. In blue sky days right now, for a lot of us, taking the time to actually put some procedures in place. If there's anything that you need to lay out of what some trigger points are to take on any action, having that as part of your procedure. Also identify who's responsible and who's making those notifications. Will it be HR, your HR department if it's internal to your employees, or is it going to be your department head, immediate supervisors? Who's making those internal notifications to your folks? Now, if it's going out to residents, it could be your PD or your fire. It could be emergency management, or even folks in your communications or a PIO team if you have one. But having those procedures and those systems laid out in place ahead of time is also critically important. Now, let's also ask the question: how are these systems used? If they're only going to be for large disasters, when you're sending out notifications for just those life-threatening situations, or is it going to be something for any type of community messaging that could hinder public safety, or that could be of public interest, such as a roadblock or road closure, perhaps an upcoming power outage or any type of construction? Having that also part of your procedure also will help expand the message of how to set those public expectations to the messaging that you're going to use for your systems. And what kind of maintenance is another question to ask. What kind of maintenance will you have for these systems? Establishing a training schedule for folks so that you have proficiency in your systems, and you're not trying to learn the system as you're trying to get a critical incident out. Again, using the blue sky days like we have now to do that. And as we ramp up into now that we're in wildfire season, continue on to do a little bit more scenario play and kind of talk things out with your folks to see and make sure that they're able to handle the process and go through those steps appropriately to really notify your residents that something is going on. We go to the next slide. And we'll jump in here to the next poll question, Melissa, if we could. Do your elected officials know about your alert and warning program? And that's a yes or no question. And I'm not sure they're an option as well. Do your elected officials know about your alert and warning program? Again, be honest. Well, there's no fault here, just to kind of help gauge the conversation and keep us going.
Perfect. So you all should see that on your screen. About half of you have responded so far, so we'll give this another few seconds. Go ahead and close this out, and then we'll share the results. There you go.
So 57% of you responded with your elections knowing about your alert and warning program. A third showing that you're not sure about them. And we'll talk a little bit about the why it's important. So as we bring up the slide, Melissa, if you would. Let's talking about the funding, and again, I mentioned it's investing and not spending. When we're talking about alert and warning, let's try to change the way we think about what we're doing with the taxpayer fundings, and that we're investing back in the community, especially when we're talking about the alert and warning program. So it's not just also saying who's paying and how much. You know, by getting the support of your senior executives, your elected officials, it's an investment again to that community. So if you're a frontline staffer, you go to your supervisor, your department head, and talk to them about your alert warning program, what you're doing on the day-to-day, what resources you might need to help make your program better. If you're a department head, you go to your CAO or city manager, same thing, letting them know what your departments are doing in terms of their alert and warning program. And if you're a CAO or city manager, going to your board or council and briefing them on what your alert and warning program is doing, what the status is of your alert and warning program, how many residents you have involved, what public education outreach you're doing to help and prepare your community so they know where to find that information, and they can also share that message as well. So the passing that messaging along to why it's important, again, goes into that investment piece, and they'll give you that ultimate support in the end. And as you talk to community, they'll know that it's coming from the organization, and it's coming from the full support of the organization. This does demonstrate that your program is a priority mission to your agency and jurisdiction. It also helps bridge that gap in communication between the capabilities of your program and the expectations of your residents. Because if you think about it, if your public officials, senior officials know what those capabilities are or what those gaps are in your alert and warning program, they can turn around and tell that to their constituents and to residents, and also gives you an opportunity to look at different ways or different technologies, which we'll talk about in a second, to help reach the majority of your population. So funding is needed for the staff and the staff time, but it also is needed for the training, again, proficiency. You need the access to the technology, as well as providing the technology to your staff in order to make an alert and warning system work as part of preparedness, as part of overall planning as well. So before we go into the next section, I just want to leave you with the URL. It's going to be part of your reference list, but it is socoemdocs.net. socoemdocs.net. It's a site that we have here in Sonoma County where we have different reference documents available to folks such as yourselves throughout the local government arena, where you can get those reference documents and use them for your own local communities as well. Melissa, I'll turn it back over to you for the next section.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jorge. We will go ahead and drop that link into the chat if you don't mind doing that, Jorge, and we'll also make sure to include it in the follow-up email that you all get, so you can have those documents and reference points as we move forward. So we are going to move into the response part of this conversation and share some additional information around alert and warning systems and things like that, evacuation routes. But I just do want to flag the time for all of our panelists. Want to make sure we have time at the end for questions. So just keep an eye on that as we go through this next section.
Sure, no problem. Hi, Nora O'Brien again from Connect Consulting. So a couple of other definitions specific to response. Shelter in place, precautionary notice, it goes when there's external hazards. So for the most part, in terms of wildfire, you may not be sheltering in place unless you're in the situation that you want to be out of the fire zone. So you certainly don't want to stay when the wildfire is heading your way. But shelter in place means you stay put and you have resources to make sure you can stay put. So water, food, and shelter, those things in your office or whether you're in your home. That's one definition. The other thing, the evacuation advisory warning. So if they're telling you that you might need to evacuate, going back to the early warning situation, the warnings process that Jorge was just talking about, it's really important. If someone is now saying, yeah, well, you might need to evacuate, we don't know, the winds might be picking up, and where are they going to go from here, that kind of thing. If you're getting those things, that's when your own organization, whether on the organizational side or for your home, you want to think that's when you want to be to prepare. That's when you're grabbing your go kit. Then you're figuring out where your animals are going to go and communicating with your staff while you still have power and those kinds of things. So that evacuation is, if you're getting a warning, that should be a precautionary, and it gives you time to prepare. Sometimes the difference between a warning and an actual mandatory evacuation is a very short amount, because again, winds pick up and they were fine, and 30 minutes from now it's at your back door kind of thing. If you're getting a mandatory evacuation, you need to leave. I'm sure you want to gather all your belongings. That's certainly a possibility to gather all your belt, but at some point you just need to get out of Dodge. You just need to get away. So if they're doing a mandatory evacuation, please leave when we're being asked, because you're going to put the responders in harm's way in order to come back and get for you and making sure people are evacuated out of the area. So on the next slide, we're talking about the response. So if a wildfire happens while you're at work, you want to follow whatever your organization's emergency response procedures are. So, and if you don't know what those are, this is a perfect opportunity to go back to your leadership and go, what is my company's emergency response procedure to a wildfire? I don't know what that is. So ask the question. You didn't know you were going to get homework when you joined our webinar today, but that's certainly, it's an opportunity to ask that question. So you, again, be ready to leave at a moment's notice if you're threatened. Again, those evacuation advisory warnings, if they're issued, you want to gather your preparedness kit. Hopefully you have that. And if you don't have the kit, you just need to get out of the area. You never want to avoid and ignore an evacuation order. It's just really important. You're putting others in harm's way when you may want to stay and fight to fight down the fire. But if you haven't done it this before, and you don't want to be in the situation of losing your life. Property, yes, I know it's horrible to lose property, but more importantly, you don't want to lose your life. If you don't feel safe during this time period and a wildfire threatens your area, evacuate earlier if possible. I know it's easier said than done, but that's understanding those evacuation routes of, is there a side road that you can go by, or is there, you want to leave as quickly as possible. So it helps the firefighters' emergency response to keep them safe by keeping the roads cleared. You want to listen to a local, radio and TV. NOAA weather radios, big fan of those. Utilize social media and emergency apps that Jorge spoke about, and actually Raheem did as well. And also big fan, let's say you're a family that is, monolingual Hmong or Spanish. You want to speak to, listen to your whatever radio station in your whatever your native language is. They're going to share that information as well. Because sometimes if they just do an alert specific to just one, just to English, and there's other communities that are, that don't speak English, it makes it harder in order to evacuate safely and get the information. So next slide. Okay. How are we doing here? Can we go to the next slide?
I moved it. Did you not see it move?
I'm not seeing it move yet. Okay, there we go. I'm just going to keep on going in the interest of time. I'm sure it'll catch up with us. On the next slide, there's 6 things to consider for your evacuation. People and pets. I know pets are part of the family. Papers, including cash, phone numbers, important documents. prescriptions, vitamins, glasses, those things that are kind of vital to have. Priceless and replicable if you have time. If you don't have time, sorry to say, leave them. Personal computers, laptops, hard drives, flash drives, and plastic credit cards, ATM cards. Okay, moving on. Next slide. There we go. Okay, so the other thing is, if you have to evacuate, you want to drive as safe as possible, roll up the windows and close the air vents. Those are really important because the smoke sometimes can be more detrimental. The smoke and the ash can be more detrimental to your respiratory system, and fire can irritate your eyes. Drive slowly as best you can with your headlights on because the smoke sometimes will reduce your visibility. Watch out for other vehicles. Avoid driving through Hobie smoke if you can avoid it. But again, do the best you can and avoid the unknown shortcuts if it can lead to an area that you're driving into the fire. You certainly don't want that. So information as best you can. Okay, next slide. Back to alerting systems. There you go.
Thank you very much, Nora. So let's take a moment to talk about a little brief overview of the alert and warning systems that are available. And as we go into the next slide, some of you may be familiar with these, so we'll just quickly go through them. But you have the wireless emergency alert, the emergency alert system, as well as the non-weather emergency messages that come with the access through FEMA IPAWS, the integrated public alert and warning system. There's also many different mass notification platforms. Many of you who have your systems are probably familiar with these, but these platform services allow local jurisdictions and agencies to send out emergency messages via a phone call or a voice message, SMS text, email, RSS feeds, which can be picked up and published elsewhere, along with social media. And some of them also have a secondary language voice message option, which allows jurisdictions to send out, for example, like we here in Sonoma County, an English as well as a Spanish message. And as we go into the next slide, there's a lot of different nuances with these mass notification platforms. You can use them and set them up any different ways. You can use them for internal call groups. You have your resident opt-in, which allows folks to register their information themselves. But you all can also receive the utility customer data from the 2020 California SB 794 as an option to augment the data that's available. For the mass notification platforms and those systems, you need to have the contact data in there in order for the system to send a message out. But it's something to again go into the investment phase, because you do need to manage this data and you do need to update it periodically. So going back to the policy, if you're going to be sending out mass notifications for your employees, if you don't do any updates after they're hired, or and you just receive that first initial contact information 5-10 years in, especially with the changes in folks as they move through the departments or they separate from the organization, you'll find that your data is also obsolete and no longer working. Now, also with the resident opt-in as well as utility data, taking it a step further with your E911 and reverse 911, if you use that type of a system and you think just by receiving that contact data, that's the end all be all. We've seen and we've done exercises and tests with traditional landlines, and we've seen that those are dropping. Not everybody has the traditional landline anymore, and sometimes even the VoIP call information, the contact data information for those who use phone service from the cable providers or satellite providers aren't necessarily included in your E911 data. They might be, and that'd be great, but that's not the end all be all. So you got to also look at the other different methods of getting folks to register, be online, and also augmenting your mass notification system as well. So as we go into the next slide as well, just leave you with this here real quickly. Each system has its pros and cons. Each platform also has their pros and cons. There is no silver bullet. There is no one size fits all type of a system that I could recommend and say this is the one that you should get. There's nothing out there, but whatever you do have, make it yours, make it specific to your agency and jurisdiction, tailor it so that your staff is able to use it in a way that's most effective in order to get the more bang for your buck. But also ensure that you have staff who learn the system, are able to train on the system, and have folks who are able to use it, so that you're not only counting on one person to use the system or send out an alert either internally or out to your residents and have them use the system. There's a lot of stories, and again, Sonoma County was witness to it in 2017 of using the system, pushing that button, training your folks so that they're comfortable in doing so, and be able to take it from there. So let's go real quickly here, talking about evacuation routes. So there's a new trend now going on in California. Your jurisdiction might be a part of it already, of breaking down your jurisdiction, your city, your county into smaller subsets or smaller sections, using evacuation zones as part of your overall planning. And it does involve many entities if you're starting this process or you haven't yet started the process. When you're talking about evacuation planning, it does include your local community, your residents, folks who are going to be adhering to these evacuations. Of course, your local fire, your local law, your emergency management types, if you have a dedicated emergency manager or you have somebody assigned to that function. It does take the workings of everyone to really make an evacuation zone map work for you, and I would encourage you to involve them in all phases of the planning process. And if you go to the next slide, there's a general rule in evacuation planning that not having publicized the pre-designated evacuation routes. There's many different ways to do it, but generally, talking here for Sonoma County, the incidents would dictate what evacuation routes to take. Traffic would dictate if there's any obstacles that folks or residents would be facing as they're evacuating. So if we're telling folks to take a certain route to leave an area, it might work during the incident, but again, based on the incident, it may not. So we do a few different community evacuations exercises throughout the year here in Sonoma County. And instead of trying to designate a route that they would take, we identify those potential roads that they could use, and also identify any potential egress challenges that residents might have, such as only having one road that goes in and out of the community, or even having roads, especially remote parts of our county, that are just single lane roads. And if you have one vehicle coming one direction, another vehicle can't leave in the other direction, especially if it's a very hectic situation. But these community evacuation exercises provide an opportunity for residents and the community to practice in a safe environment, leave the area, get to know their area a little bit more, explore what roads they might have available to them. And the map you see there on the right is a sample of what was provided to residents during one of the evacuation exercises that we had last year. It doesn't identify which road to take, but if depending on where residents live, they could make the determination or figure out which road that they would want to use during that exercise. So let's go over to the next slide and talk a little bit about communications. There are a lot of technologies and your typical systems there. We have the cellular, telephone, TV, radio, government, public safety radio, ham radio. Those are your typical systems that we all currently have, we all currently use. Newish, especially in the alert and warning space that we're working on here in Sonoma County. Like I mentioned, the non-weather emergency messages that are broadcasted out through the NOAA weather radios. We also are seeing a lot of residents starting to organize groups as part of the GMRS, or the General Mobile Radio Service, and creating a net that they use using the GMRS frequencies to communicate and send emergency information back and forth. There's also a project that we're working on about a satellite relay of a radio signal specific to the NOAA weather radio that we're working on here in Sonoma County. And to touch on the NOAA weather radios a little bit more, we are looking at going into a partial county alerting, which will break down the zone or the area of our NOAA weather radios. So instead of having them broadcast countywide, they're only broadcasting to a smaller section of the county that's more affected by the incident. And we go into next slide and talk about accessibility. Again, for specific to Sonoma County, and also information that you can find in socoemdocs.net. We have a county requirement to send out messages in both English and Spanish, and we do that at the same time with consistent information across all of the different systems and technologies that we have. We also do a dual website, socoemergency.org in English and socoemergencia.org in Spanish, having that same information on there as well. Braille capabilities is another thing that we have, where we purchased a Braille printer in conjunction with a local organization who are able to get that preparedness information out as well. So think about the projects and things that your organization, your jurisdiction can do, about what more can we do to be more accessible to our residents. So I hope I wasn't too fast on that. I know we're running a little bit low on time. So Melissa, at this point, I'll head it back to you, or Raheem, for the next section.
Yeah, Raheem, why don't you cover this quickly, and then we can hopefully get into some questions.
Absolutely, yeah. So building on the topic of communications, right, once an event occurs, it's really important to know what resources are available and how to help mitigate the impacts of the event, and how to be prepared for future events. So I'll say we're actively engaging with our customers via notifications and outreach, particularly the access and functional needs community, so they're better prepared, for example, like with PSPS events and other outages ahead of time. We have a dedicated web page at sce.com/AFN that has a host of detailed information about the resources that SCE provides. I'll spare everyone the details here for sake of time. A couple other points here. So during PSPS events, we actually have community resource centers and community crew vehicles that we make available to support our customers in strategic areas around the incident. We realize that a lot of folks are without power, without phone and other types of communication. So at these sites, we can answer customer questions in person. We also provide resiliency kits. They contain actually some of the items that Nora talked about earlier on in the presentation. Shifting again to a little bit beyond communications, right, and preparing for future events. Important to familiarize yourself with the other resources that are made available. So we offer rebates on portable battery backup solutions, hotel discounts, and other programs to help customers during PSPS events and other emergencies. There's also no-cost backup batteries with solar charging capabilities to eligible income qualified customers who rely on medical equipment to live, and if they live in high fire risk areas. So all this and much more is not is part of the response, but it also ties into mitigation on how we help reduce the impacts of wildfires and power outages. So the other piece I'll end with too is engage your government relation managers, right? So for us at SCE, engage your GRM and engage your local utilities GRM too to continue the discussion. Melissa, I'll hand it back over to you.
Great, thank you so much for all of these tips in this conversation. I'm going to suggest we do have a little bit of content around recovery and reimbursements and things like that. In the interest of time, I'm going to suggest that we perhaps skip over that, and I would suggest that you reach out to Nora. She's a wealth of information on that front if you have questions about that process and what happens after an event and how you can recover in your agency. But I do want to make sure we hold a little bit of time here for some of the questions that I've been seeing come through. So if everybody on the panel is okay, I would love to jump to take a couple of questions.
That sounds great.
And as a reminder, again, we will be sending out the slide deck, so you will have this information at your fingertips as well. But there's definitely some great information on Connect Consulting's website about after action assessments and things like that. So we definitely aren't going to have time to get to all of the questions, unfortunately, but I do want to get to a couple of these that I've seen come through, and definitely feel free to follow up with us. I'll share our contact information at the end if we don't get to your question or if something comes up after today's call. Raheem, a couple of questions have come in about the Public Safety Partner Portal in regards to who has access to that. Can you just share a little bit of information about who is able to access that portal?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question. Essentially, public safety partners and critical infrastructure customers, as defined by the Public Utilities Commission, they have access to our portal, and we also market that through our government relation managers and our business customer division for our critical infrastructure customers. I highly encourage you to sign up for that if you don't have access to it already, and also for our peer utilities, San Diego Gas and Electric and PG&E for the other two major ones in California. They also have similar public safety partner portals, so depending upon where you live, highly encourage you to reach out and get access to those.
I was just going to ask that question, so great to know that all of the utilities have that portal, so definitely look into that for where you sit in the state. Jorge, a quick question about your alerting systems. We have an attendee asking if you have a guiding document about how you use your alert system. So when, what type of event triggers that? When do you deploy your alerting systems? Do you have a guiding document, or can you share a little bit of information about how you all make those decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with referencing socoemdocs.net, or you can also visit the plan's website at sonomacounty.ca.gov and look for our plans. We recently updated and also published our alert and warning annex, which details kind of the questions and more about our program overall, but also what some of those trigger points and those systems that we use here and when we would use them are on there. The Sheriff's Office does do NICSO alerts, and they also mirror what we do for SoCo Alert, our local mass notification system, in that we are only pushing information out during a major incident or a life-threatening incident, but it is jurisdiction by jurisdiction, and therein lies where your jurisdiction's community expectations would be and what you would be able to manage in terms of sending out that information out to your residents. socoemdocs.net.
Perfect. And we have dropped that link into the chat, so you guys can reference that. And again, I will share that out in the follow-up email as well, so you can refer back to it after today's webinar. Another question as it relates to some of these communications and alerting systems that I think a lot of jurisdictions may have questions about. So this is great when everybody has access to power and communications and all of their devices and all of that. They have access to those alerting systems. Often in an emergency event or a wildfire, folks may not have that same access, be able to charge their devices. So you've talked a little bit about that, but any tips for the agencies on the line in terms of getting that information out to residents in an actual emergency event where they may not have that same communication connection as they would in their day-to-day lives?
So I'll respond it in with a couple of different sections. So the first is, with the public safety power shutoff for PSPS, there is generally some notice that we would have ahead of the actual shutdown or the de-energization. With that, we are able to push the information out, very heavily, saying if there is an incident, you may not receive power, but do prepare, do have battery backups, do have whatever you can do to stay connected, stay informed. We also working with our local utility up here being PG&E is identifying those community resource centers that will also have that capability to have power, and also point folks to those locations so that they stay informed. Our public information team works hard to make sure that message goes out. If we do have an incident, if we do have an activation or an active wildfire. We also use the sheriff's office to go out and do high-low alerting, and that might be something that your jurisdiction is considering or actually has available, where the sheriff's office, law enforcement goes out using the European style high-low siren to notify folks that there's an evacuation order for that area. And again, the messaging behind the evacuation order is to leave now. So that public education and that messaging is something that we do on the day-to-day, so that if we are in that circumstance or in that situation where there is power that is de-energized and folks are without electricity and can't get our alerts, we have those redundant methods to alerting them and getting them that information.
Perfect. Yeah, thinking through the high-tech and low-tech options and solutions, right, to reach folks. Nora or Raheem, anything to add to that? I know you all talked about communication and community interaction a little bit.
Well, one thing that I'd add is, don't forget our community-based organizations that serve, whether it's a family resource center or a school or whatever those things are. People tend to go to the places that they're their trusted partners. So it may not be during the disaster they're going to actually ask the family resource center to help them evacuate, but they are highly important as part of the recovery process to provide, personal care supplies or whatever those things are that they need in order to help them recover. So involve them in your planning, include them. Are they aware of, do you have good relationships with your community-based organizations? Because they're certainly going to be your lifeline and support, and when you're trying to get your community to recover, both physically but also emotionally as well. So that emotional support is important too.
No, that's a great tip. Definitely something to consider in the preparation phase, right? Building and maintaining relationships with community organizations and other stakeholders.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of what I call just-in-time relationships. That you got to know each other well in advance of the disaster. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. Raheem, any closing thoughts on that before we wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. Certainly engaging the CBOs of community-based organizations, but I'll also say, understanding that power shutoff is a major impact to our customers and communities, reaching out to folks in a multitude of ways, and then using our mobile devices to visit, right, in our case, sce.com/PSPS, to identify where these CRCs and CCVs are. So you can go there physically and talk to a local utility representative and get more information, pick up that resiliency kit, and be better prepared for the future with battery backups and other options that may be available.
Great. So my apologies to the folks on the line whose questions we did not get to. I know that there are quite a few, so I'm going to go ahead and go through the next couple of slides here, and then we'll let you guys go for your afternoon. But these are some of the resources that were discussed during today's webinar, so we just wanted to collapse them into one slide for you. So when you receive this, you have a point of reference, things like the hazard mitigation policy and the CAL FIRE links, as well as some of SCE's tools that Raheem mentioned. So think about this as you continue to plan and prepare at your agency. This is how to stay in touch with ILG for future webinars. You can sign up for our newsletter, follow us on social media. And then I will leave this here for folks to take down contact information. If we didn't get to your question, or if you have another question that has come up during today's conversation, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or any of our panelists on the line. They'd be more than happy to answer any questions. And again, apologies for not getting to the recovery section of today's webinar, but Nora and Connect Consulting are a great resource for you in that space as well if you have questions or would like more information. So with that, I would just like to thank all of you for taking your morning and spending it with us and hearing more about wildfire mitigation, preparedness, and response. And a big thank you to all of my panelists for sharing your experiences and expertise with our attendees. Raheem, Nora, Jorge, any final thoughts before we close out?
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you very much, Melissa and ILG. Thank you, everyone who attended.
Absolutely. Thank you to ILG and the panel and participants.
Great. Well, thank you again, everybody, and have a great afternoon.
All right.